Hello, everyone. Welcome to Hunting for Silver Linings. Today is April 23rd, a Friday here in the Great Lakes region of the United States, where I am the chapter director for Grand Rapids, Michigan. Joined with my colleague and co-host, we have Yorgo Katsanos. He is in Holland, Michigan today, and we normally get him jumping in from all over the United States. And today we're checking in with a fairly new Startup Grind chapter director, but he's not new to the idea of ecosystem building and economic development, or that of helping flocks of entrepreneurs grow their businesses. We have Naimul from Stockholm. So thank you so much for making time for us today.
Thank you so much for having me here. I really love what you guys are doing. I like the title that you have. I think it's good for these times.
Yes, we've just celebrated our 1 year anniversary, I think, of having
Hmm.
these conversations. It was born out of a coffee that Yorgo and I shared as uncertainty was like blanketing the planet, and we just kind of wanted to see what was going on the ground around the planet, just
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
help really inform what we would do here locally um, as folks in Asia and Europe had a few days to weeks ahead of what was happening in the US. We just
Hmm.
kind of wanted to see what was coming. Uh,
Hmm.
and then we were really excited that the rest of the community found value, and so we've continued to do this, and it's been a lot of
Okay.
fun meeting our fellow directors. So great to make your acquaintance. Would love to learn a little bit about your personal background. I know you have some deep experience in the startup space and ecosystem building space. So how did you get started, and what was your inspiration um, to 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 really lean in on entrepreneurism?
I think that's a very good question. And the background for that is that there are two parts to my life. One was before Sweden, and that's where I have had a very interesting corporate career, which started with the strategy head of an ad agency and then going deep into ad and research agencies. For several years, I also headed marketing departments, consumer insights department. So a lot of marketing and strategy building and insights building. So that was more than 10 years in Pakistan. And then afterwards that, it was in Middle East, Saudi Arabia. And then I came to Sweden. And I thought this is a great place to do something completely different, because Sweden and the Scandinavian region is known for its innovation and entrepreneurship. That's where I started entrepreneurship in on several fronts. One is that I coach entrepreneurs through a job role that I have with a state sponsored organization. It's called Coompanion. So I've been working there, and right now I'm coaching around 500 or so startup founders every year. And these are very early stage founders. When you are in early stage, your questions are what kind of companies to start, is the business model right or not, are we ready for investors or not. So it's very early stage questions. So that's one thing that I do. Apart from that, I'm passionate about building my own portfolio. So I have a very interesting impact tech portfolio of my own, which is taking shape now. And then at the end of 2000 or so, or 2020, yeah, it was August, I think, when Startup Grind came along. And the chapter needed new leadership and kind of an approach to get back into the market. It has been built as a great chapter over several years, but for a year or so, it was just there and not very active. So I took up the challenge, jumped in, and my friend Jens, who runs the Hong Kong chapter, he was a great help initially in setting up the chapter here. And then I went ahead and recruited some rock stars in terms of teams, because without teams, it's very difficult to build something. Because Startup Grind generally is a give back to community, a volunteer community. So that's what we did. We created an awesome chapter team, and then we started inviting speakers which people would like to listen to, speakers who have interesting stuff to share with entrepreneurs. So that's how it all started, and it's going and it's going ahead at
That's
full speed right
awesome.
now.
Uh, and and so when I began the Startup Grind chapter here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, West Michigan,
Mhm.
there's a lot of support organizations, incubators, state level economic development organization money coming in, universities, innovation hubs within like companies, and as I walked
Mhm.
around and met people, they were saying, why this also? Don't we have enough, happening here? And with your experience, and also you're actively in many different capacities helping to bolster the ecosystem there locally. What does Startup Grind offer that those other things, including Founders Institute and everything else that you've plugged in with partnerships,
Right.
what don't they do that Startup Grind can do or does?
I think entrepreneurship activity, like if we compare it with what it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago, has grown a lot. So the entire trend in the business sector is that people now are at times skipping college education because they think that's not relevant. It's old. So school is really old school. So entrepreneurship is probably your first school, the real school of life where you go and learn new things. And that's where I think there is such a large rush of new ideas out there these days that no single actor and no single ecosystem is enough. So ecosystems are really very tiny things right now. So compared to the demand that's out there from entrepreneurs, I think Stockholm is bursting at its seams. Top incubators, they're not even touching the top 1% of the entrepreneurship. So I think there is so much potential, and that's where you need a global player like Startup Grind to jump in. Because if we don't jump in, how would entrepreneurs get connected? So I think it's a natural fit that we have in the market through our global backbone, and that global backbone is built around, as I was saying, the culture of giving back is very important because that's not necessarily there as a given in entrepreneurship circles. So people are making money on startups, so there's a lot of, but Startup Grind is a perfect player to be in because we connect entrepreneurs for free, we give them tips for free, we invite great speakers who are able to share their experiences. It's all for free. Of course, during COVID times, it is much easier to do virtual events. But even if you are hosting a physical event where there's a small ticket, the value of outcome from that event is much higher than what you put in. It's hardly the cost of a meal for which you get all these great insights. So I think Startup Grind is a hugely needed actor in any ecosystem because very few actors are good at connecting entrepreneurs and reaching deep down and talking at their level and answering their questions. Yeah,
Especially like the super really early stage entrepreneurs. Sometimes
exactly.
even know they're called entrepreneurs. When like when you speak
Yeah.
about
And
people.
that activity is very big in Sweden because there is so much rush in Stockholm and other parts of Sweden to just create ventures. I see in my coaching work at Coompanion Stockholm, there are so many professionals who are now thinking, is it really worth my time to actually go to a 9 to 5 job? What value am I getting out of it? So they go in and create non-profits. They go in and create scalable ventures. They create small businesses like restaurants. So there is so much startup activities starting up, I would say, startup activity starting up, that we are in a sweet spot right now, a Startup Grind, I would say.
May I ask, in this
Yeah.
regard, the 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 background that you bring to the table, Naimul, is very impressive. First of all, because you belong to both the technological diaspora, but also you've traveled around the world, so you've
Mm.
seen different ecosystems, and sometimes that is a tremendously powerful insight to bring to the table. But what do you think is driving this spurt of innovation? What are the key factors in your mind, given your experience, please? And why, in particular, Stockholm?
I think Stockholm has been recognized as a global innovation hub, of course. So that's a given on the table. And when that's there, it shows that it means that the ecosystem, players in the ecosystem have reached a certain level of maturity and they are able to help the entrepreneurs out there. On the other side, I think it what I feel, I think one of the leading things that are happening across ecosystem, across the world, I would say, it's impact. Because entrepreneurs are now questioning that all these big multi-billion dollar organizations, uh, are they really doing something good for the world or not? Or do we need to step in and do something good? So I think it's a very real concern at a personal level that is driving a lot of people to business itself. So I think that's one thing. Secondly, when you are uh, are recognized as an innovation ecosystem hub, you're seeing all these success stories like Klarna, Spotify. So there's a lot of how would you say, success stories which are driving entrepreneurs. Okay, if they can do it, maybe we can do it also. So I think in Stockholm that's very important, because people feel that this is the place. It's the place where your entrepreneurship dream can work. So that faith is very important for an entrepreneur, because at an early stage you are really struggling against all odds. You don't know how the road is laid out in front of you, but you know, okay, that person crossed it, this person crossed it, and then the media is active to pick up investment stories and all. So I think media, narrative building, and success stories are real drivers for moving people into entrepreneurship. Other thing is that they see so much change that is needed. Stockholm being, or Sweden being, a very educated, well endowed in terms of the social structure or the welfare structure of Swedish state is very strong. So even if when you are in schools, you have a strong grant structure for students. And when that is happening, you as a student have the leverage to take risk, which may not be there in some other ecosystems where you are paying so much for your education. Education in Sweden is free. So I think there are several enabling factors which make it possible for this ecosystem to thrive on new ideas. You're muted. Can't hear you.
Thank you, Naimul. You remind me of a conversation we had with the Professor Arthur Markman over at the University of Texas at Austin, where he actually talked about the coral. He gave the analogy of the coral as an instrument of rebuilding ecosystems. And I think he described it very interestingly in the case of Stockholm, because it seems that you had the successes of Skype, the success of Nokia, the success of all kinds of young entrepreneurs who started all the way back in the 80s. On the one hand, you have the ecosystem that consists of higher education, the universities. You have an open community, and at the same time, you have traveling. So if you look at the um, the map for a moment here, and we always try to do that so with our audience can see where you're located. You're literally in the middle of the Scandinavian world, but also with strong proximity to Northern Europe. So I guess you must be enjoying the benefits of this collaboration and flow of ideas.
I think that's very much so. And of course, as the startups grow, there's a lot of cross-border collaborations happening. One of the easiest examples of this is there is so much rush of tech ideas. The Swedish government has projected there are we are short by hundreds of thousands of IT jobs, and when that is the case, you're of course going into cross-border relationship with development companies. So it's not only how startups evolve in different geographies or collaborate. It's a very important need of a startup to jump across the borders and find developers in Ukraine, Poland, India, Sri Lanka, and build cross country teams. And that's very much on happening at a very early stage in Stockholm. So we see a couple of my startups, for example, in which I am. So I said that I have been building an impact tech portfolio. We have partners outside Sweden, and they are part of the company, and we are building things together. So that's very natural. In other cases, what happens also is that certain incubators or accelerators, they have a peak support capacity. After that, you think, okay, now we need a bigger ecosystem. So you, of course, can think about going to the West Coast or go to London. So that happens. That's natural mobility of the startup growth process, I'd say. That's good.
One additional point that I want to bring to this discussion, and I think your input here is very important. It has to do with blockchain. Having spent the last 4 years or so going backwards and forwards to Bangalore, looking at the ecosystem there, looking at the evolution of the startups, it seems to me that blockchain has become a platform that is empowering individuals. And I think this confluence of ideas, on the one hand, the hardware, the mobility, the software, and specific applications, is giving us the opportunity to really go beyond the traditional way of thinking.
Definitely. I think there are several things which bring the Stockholm's ecosystem together, for example. So I think there is deep tech, which is very much, when I interview ecosystem builders, they say deep tech is a place, blockchain is a place for future. We are also very strong on food tech. In ideas in impact, for example. So there are several themes. So what I think is that Stockholm is very multicultural and it's multi-thematic place. So there are so many sub themes into entrepreneurship, and you can find your sub ecosystem. So for example, if we talk about impact, you suddenly locate that Europe's largest impact player, Norgen, is there. They recently closed a 1.2 billion Swedish crowns fund. So that's huge, coming from a place like, they just started 4 years ago and were able to raise this fund. And 5 or 10 years ago, impact was not even known. That just happened. So Norken is there, Impact Hub is there, and there are so many new impact measurement, funding, and support organizations now coming up. Coompanion Stockholm, for example, the organization that I work for, we are in process of kind of creating a prototype for a social impact academy right now. It's a small project that we have been given. In Swedish it's called Forstudie, which is a pre-evaluation research that we are doing, but eventually it'll become very big in the coming years. So even if we take a space like impact, there is so much happening in impact. So I would say Stockholm is not a very big city. We are slightly over 1 million people compared to London or let's say other ecosystems. So we are in the count, we are small, but we are very rich in terms of diversity of sub ecosystems, I would say.
So now that we're back in talking about your ecosystem, you mentioned a couple of the different sectors that the ecosystem stakeholders are really interested in. For the benefit of those who don't have even a general understanding of your region, what are some of the more popular or traditional sectors of your region that your ecosystem comprises of?
I think the strongest one I would say is, which is driving Stockholm, is impact. So generally impact is very strong, but then in impact again, you can go down and find how would you say, sub ecosystem. So impact itself is a sub ecosystem, but even in impact, we can now see even sub ecosystems or nodes coming up, where we can find an acute focus on climate action related programs, climate action related support structures. So Sting, for example, is Nordic's leading accelerator. They have, I think, 7 companies that they have taken in, startups in their climate action program. So climate action was specifically made as a program. We have journal sustainability, of course, over there. And then we also see a lot of work coming in the social innovation space. And if we go even deeper in social innovation, there's a lot of work happening for migrant entrepreneurs, a lot of work happening for women entrepreneurs. There's a lot of, because we need to go back to the big question that always comes in such discussions, that the VC funding or traditional funding or the startup ecosystems are not geared to helping women. They're not geared to helping, let's qualify that, not helping women enough. not helping minorities enough, not helping entrepreneurs who don't fit the traditional criteria. So I think even if we go into a node like social innovation, there are so many new things happening. For example, I would give you an example. A leading Swedish newspaper called Break It, they went up and created something called Shift with 2 or 3 other players, and Shift launched a competition of social innovations, and they got more than 1,000 how would you say applications. So it's all happening. So it's happening very fast. So every day you find out that there's something new happening. So I would say okay, going back, there's a lot of sub ecosystem building work happening, and Sweden is also very unique because to outside world, maybe Stockholm is the only town that's there. Then you go, you zoom in a little bit more, you find, okay, there is Gothenburg, there is Malmo, there is Uppsala. These are great places. You zoom down a little more and you find, oh shit, there is a place like Växjö, there's a place like Kalmar, and these are all sub Stockholms. So so it's really very interesting going into, because each of these cities has its own ecosystems within ecosystems. So if I take a case of Växjö, I spent my 4 years in Växjö before I came to Stockholm. It has its own incubator, it has its own investor networks, it has its own angel networks, has all major support organizations like Almi, Drivhuset, Coompanion, they're all there. So Swedish entrepreneurship, why it rises to the top of the world, even though Sweden is not a very big country, is because entrepreneurship's roots are very deep and diverse.
I'm and we have a new chapter in that small little community that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
We're looking forward to having her, the new chapter director there on eventually. They just had their first event, I think it was yesterday. And I know for Michigan, we're looking to borrow from your example and helping to launch chapters in these smaller communities that are overlooked, right?
Yeah.
Because the big question is, where's the talent? Where are the ideas? Where are the innovators? I think they're everywhere. Like they're not simply concentrated in the larger communities.
And that's where the opportunity pockets are. I am always in belief that at times it's very difficult. Like COVID has made it easy for entrepreneurs to actually pitch across their local geographies, but it still is very much a local question. So I think it's very important for us at Startup Grind to kind of look at Sweden as a country and see, okay, guys, in next 1 year, can we have 10 different places alive with Startup Grind? So I think I'm thinking like that. So maybe so identifying local heroes in these great cities, which are not on the radar, but it doesn't mean that there is not opportunity there. There's so much talent. Växjö, for example, is a university town. I myself, when I came to Sweden, I just took 2 master's programs. I went through 1 master's in marketing and 1 in entrepreneurship, just to learn the entrepreneurship ecosystem. Because it's a great way, because when you are a student, you get to benefit from the tremendous support you have in Swedish innovation ecosystem, all for free, all for free.
Right. So, and that's a benefit of that continent there. So, like
Yes.
we don't really understand the strength there here in the U.S. What Yorgo and I like to do is we like to also understand the typical journey of an early stage entrepreneur. Say Yorgo and I are locals there. We we have an idea, but it seems like from what you've already described, it's not going to take very much for us to bump into someone who can connect us and get us plugged into the ecosystem and start swimming around with everyone. And when we do have this early idea, how long does it take someone to usually get welcomed into the flock? And at that point, it's people, like the mindset is pretty open to new innovation and innovators?
Very good question. I always put the consumer journey in terms of how many different consumers are out there. So let's try to create some use cases or some consumers out there or some entrepreneurs out there. So typically an entrepreneur in an ecosystem like Stockholm would be quite aware, quite digitally enabled. So when you go and search things, a lot of information from different players, which are state finance, like Coompanion, like Almi, like others, it's available digitally as well. So your first level of journey is digital, where you can find something like you just type the word start a company and poop, 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 all these information will come out. So you can first have how would you say, you can munch over that information yourself, number one. Going back, that information could still be accessible in a smaller city, but maybe you don't have regional locations for these main actors in a really small cities. But in a fairly even sized city, you would find them. So your challenge then is to whether you can find information online and make your journey, or do you want to go and meet these. So if we take the COVID anomaly out, so the usual case for entrepreneurs would be that they would start knocking the doors. They'll do their first search and then see which one is the relevant advisor, which one is the relevant organization, what type of company I need to create, where is my idea. Okay, I can knock on the door for, let's say, Coompanion, because they are great in creating social entrepreneurship and impact ventures. Or I can go and knock the door of another player like Almi, because they are great in terms of finding me early stage funding in terms of verification of my idea or some early stage loan. If I'm a university entrepreneur, my first destination will be in Sweden. We have an organization which helps university students called Revuset. So maybe you'll go to your local Revuset counter. If you are slightly more advanced, maybe these are your first support level infrastructures, because they are widely distributed in Sweden. When you come here, you will get your initial coaching in terms of business model, canvas, social canvas, whatever tools they have. And then they'll say, maybe at that time, entrepreneurs are confident enough to just jump in, or they could say, I think my idea could benefit from additional coaching or a program. That's where some programs come in, like incubators, like, or accelerators like Sting come in, co-working spaces jump in, because they might say, at home doing this, I'll get bored and the idea will just fizzle out. So I really need to sit. And that could be part of their coaching. So I think you start online, you go to your first level of support network in the Swedish ecosystem. From there, you get the inspiration whether you want to go, or do you want to have a co-working space? Do you want to go through some sort of the incubator program? You want to join some sort of a project which is doing similar things like you, or would it be good to kind of enroll yourself into some sort of an investor readiness or crowdfunding platform, because those are like third or fourth levels of support. Yeah, so I would say that's the usual journey for entrepreneurs. And it could vary in smaller cities, because in smaller cities it might be slightly difficult to penetrate the ecosystem at a physical level. But with COVID, I think when COVID happened, let's say in March last year, I remember the first one month of the meetings was very haphazard. Like people were showing up, not very sure of. But now entrepreneurs are like, boom, boom, boom. They are prepared. Business cases are ready. You're having effective meetings. So I think it's COVID has been the silver lining here is it has kind of jump started the entire entrepreneurship community into creating things faster, let's say, in a more connected manner. Even though the human interaction side is still, because we are still here. If we were meeting physically, we could sense each other's presence, see the body language, and that's gold. But it's a start.
I know Yorgo wants to jump in here, but it was interesting at the global conference last year in 2020. We were talking about at our director summit that we were at a global 60-year low in entrepreneurism, and then pandemic, and here we are at a global high.
Yeah.
What you're just speaking about, and so Yorgo.
Well, first of all, this is a very interesting description. I didn't realize that the ecosystem in Stockholm, Naimul, has been so diverse and so well organized. It seems to me that the Swedish model of social entrepreneurship is not only alive and kicking, but working very well. Which then brings the question, when should we expect the next unicorns? And in which areas do you see unicorns?
Very interesting point. I think there are a couple of challenges with Sweden as a market when you are launching ventures. So my own criticism of the market is that we are at times very much methodical and planned. So when entrepreneurs come to such a structured market, we push them too much on the structure side. While I think the biggest thing an entrepreneur can actually do is to go out and sell, learn from mistake, and build the venture faster. Because speed, interaction is the most important thing in a venture. So I think that's something which I think kind of inhibits growth of entrepreneurs behind after the very early stage to, let's say, a middle stage venture. So I think that's
Can you talk a little bit more about it? Can you clarify a little bit more what you're talking about? Because I think that is a very important point.
Yeah. So imagine that you are in a place where there are so many teachers and so many teachers of so many different capabilities. So as an entrepreneur, you at times might get confused going to 4 different places, getting different tools, each organization making you, okay, you need to do it like this. And do it. When I'm doing my coaching, I tell entrepreneurs, whatever I'm telling you, when you move out of this meeting, just trash 90% of what I said and just take that 10% that you think is relevant and you think you can act on, and take it with a pinch of salt, because we are not running your business. We are just giving you outside advice. I think the power imbalance between the advisors versus entrepreneurs is very strong anywhere in any ecosystem. So it's not unique to Stockholm or Sweden. So I think there is a lot of advisory help available, but I would summarize it by saying that maybe it's too much. It's an elephant's load on an ant, which is a venture. So the entrepreneurship venture is the ant size, and the load of advisory service is this much or this structured. So I think that's where we kind of I believe it's not a tested hypothesis or anything, but my feel is we lose a lot of early stage potential that could go very fast out. I think the other thing that I think that happens is that Sweden itself is highly digitized. It's a very, very digital market, and it's a small market. So it's not, so comparing it to the market that I come from, Pakistan, for example. Pakistan is a highly youth population oriented, I think 220 million people versus Sweden, 10 million people. So if you are launching a venture which is more based, most of these digital ventures are based directed towards youth, you have a much faster chance of building the venture in terms of count of people in that market versus this market, which is highly digitally saturated, not very open to new ideas. So your local testing ground is not very good. So your innovation output is very high for the country, but innovation reception or testing capability is not that high because it's saturated. So I think that's where another thing happens. And then when you're building with entrepreneurs, what happens is they get stuck in their geographic mindset. So any entrepreneur, when they're giving their pitch deck and telling me, Naimul, we are building this great gaming app and we'll start from this city of Sweden, go to this city. So we always think in near geographic terms. So geographic terms, number one, high digitalization and over saturation of society in terms of already so many brilliant concepts there, and society being, do I need another app? And then low population, I think that makes scaling another challenge in Swedish market. So somewhere these startups need to stop listening to advisors that much, find outside markets to build their venture, and have diverse teams so that that outside market is not a problem of first time understanding for these people. I think these three could be good in terms of scaling up ventures.
Thank you, Naimul. That is actually the first time we hear the analysis of high mortality rate of young entrepreneurships. And I think that is correct. I think the analysis paralysis concept of too many teachers, too many chefs in the kitchen, I think it is a very interesting example. I think also your regional focus is very interesting as well, namely the fact that you have local myopia. And the third, of course, is the saturation, the idea that maybe we've gone too far into the technological, so to speak, realm, in the digital realm, and maybe we can go back to analog relations and operations, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll just want to continue my thought with the previous thing, because I realized that I missed one point, and which I think is very important, because Sweden is like, let's say, let's take a metaphor, or let's take an analogy. So Sweden is a place where you have songwriters. So songwriting is a creative activity. So these songwriters are entrepreneurs, let's say. So there is so much songwriting happening. There is so much creative potential in this society that at times, when you have created a great idea or a great song, the next day you wake up with an even bigger idea and you say, oh shit, that was okay, fine. So many of their ideas die their own death just because the entrepreneur got bored and started something different. So that person might have created a company, might have tested the water. Company creation is very easy. Digitalization, all this support out there. You can just go ahead. 10 days later, you have a running company. You can start testing the idea right away. In Pakistan, building company maybe takes 3 months. But in 10 days, you have a company, you have the partners, you can start testing ideas, and you get bored. Um, Sports is not my thing. I'll probably go in e-gaming. Yeah, that's where I'll create the next thing. And then you close it yourself. So I think it can also be a product of high creative boredom, which is very natural. Yeah.
So, thank you. Now back to Yorgo and I and our venture. So we're early
Yeah.
stage. We're able to figure out our product market fit because we have all the support and we're going out and talking to customers. We're not going to be limited by geography because we've been wisely advised by you and your colleagues. You said that there's a lot of resources for early stage like funding to validate our idea and to get moving. It's very easy to create the company. That's not a problem. Finding team is not a problem. Um, uh, but past that early stage funding, and because it is a smaller ecosystem, now Yorgo and I are looking for more capital, some growth capital. What is that like in Stockholm and in Sweden?
I think there are several VCs out there with growth capital. I think the main thing one needs to look for as a scale up is to look for the larger European ecosystem, because most of the funds in Sweden have their spread across several markets. So the moment you leave the startup game and move into the scale up game, you are a regional player, and that's where your regional funds like Atomico, Equity Ventures start kicking in. So I think then you become a regional player. So, but early stage is very much a local level thing. I think at early stage level, entrepreneurs are very hesitant reaching out to places like, so if you're let's say you have a great idea, you have built something, it will hardly happen that you'll reach out to Y Combinator or an incubator in, let's say, London. You'll just be stuck in Stockholm or some other place in Sweden. So I think reach out is very limited at the early venture creation, but as soon as you kind of break the threshold, you are a regional player, and then these funds can come in and invest in you. And most of that investment activity is at times happening with multiple funds or multiple family offices. So it goes, I would say.
Cool. Now, uh, it's a pleasure to be speaking with someone in an ecosystem that is so well developed and has mastered the art of density, et cetera. Because a lot of times we're talking about like some real critical issues, infrastructure issues on building ecosystems. But you mentioned something earlier in our conversation about trends, especially with women founders, migrant founders, investment in those spaces, minority founders. Like to learn a little bit about how these global trends and attention on gender, social, racial, ethnic equity. How are those how those trends in this last year affected like the movement of innovation and capital? Because we're seeing in our conversations that the global the global ecosystem is certainly benefiting, right? But how is it affecting your region, and what do you see from maybe some past examples, and what are you looking forward to in the next 6, 12, 24 months?
I think very good point over there. I think something which is unique about Swedish model is being a welfare state. Entrepreneurship support system is heavily state sponsored with organizations like we have an organization called Tillväxtverket, which is the Swedish growth authority, which gives out a lot of funds to organizations like Coompanion Stockholm or rest of Coompanions and Almis and all that. And when that money, so they are now also building up on their indicators. So when you are giving out so much money to entrepreneurship support ecosystems, they are now putting up demands like, when you are advising it on an equal basis? Is the capital going correctly? So we have to report these, how would you say, horizontal criteria, like where we need to see, like, for example, I can give last year's example. The journal trend in the market is quite different, but Coompanion Stockholm was able to advise entrepreneurs mix of 50-50 men and women. That's very difficult to achieve, and many ecosystem players are still struggling there. So we made our effort in our channels to especially go out and make sure that our message was well understood by everyone, not just by one particular group of entrepreneurs. So I think first answer to that is that there is a lot of state work happening at policy level that goes down to growth support or funding organizations, that then goes down to node levels, which is reported back, and it has to adhere to criteria, to indicators which have traditionally been very weak. Okay, so that's first level. Second thing is that most of the commercial level funds or incubators and accelerators are also, because it's a trend now, because everybody, if the state is doing so, everybody is doing so then. So you see all that happening at even commercial levels, and there are programs coming out specifically with saying these are for women entrepreneurs, these are for migrant entrepreneurs, so communities which have been removed from capital or support systems. That's a lot of commercial work coming out. So I think on both sides this is happening. And third thing, I think what is very important is the role of media. Media is very active to pick up if somebody with difficult circumstances had to work 5 times more than a simple path and make it, that story definitely comes out. So I think information, state, and commercial, all three angles are working on this. And that's why we see a lot of change happening. I also see a lot of spontaneous networks being created. So I have coached a few entrepreneurs who ended up creating women-based or migrant-based, how would you say, volunteer networks. And volunteer spirit is, I think, the fourth big thing in this case, because Sweden is a place where the friending culture, association culture is very strong. So you end up creating a lot of societal initiatives as non-profits or even for-profits associations where you have members. So I think network, community building, and give back to the community is very big. So all these four things are contributing to all the weak areas that we have.
Naimul, one of the questions that I have, and also our audience, relates to foreigners. We know that given the spirit of innovation and the global perspective of innovation, a number of countries in Europe, including Denmark and Sweden, have facilitated acceptance, what I would call the Canadian model. In other words, you give young entrepreneurs, particularly from university, but also foreigners, the opportunity to come in and join the ecosystem, as long as they can generate ideas, technology, innovation, and so on and so forth. Can you talk to us a little bit about these trends in Sweden?
Very good point. I think, first of all, I'll quote myself as an example. Somebody who just came in and thought, fine, this is a place for me to create entrepreneurship. And the system was quite open. I think a mistake, I think, which entrepreneurs also make, and we are all humans, is that we don't ask. I think you need the job. If you land in a new place, it's for you to ask directions, because people outside might not know if you are lost. So let's say if by some chance you get landed, if you are just going, you are going out shopping hamburger, let's say, and somehow you end up in the middle of a soccer field, or I'm just giving an analogy, and you're saying, oh shit, where am I? So maybe you first need to ask somebody, like, where am I? I don't see a hamburger stand over here. Is it what? They'll say, okay, you are in a space where people are playing. So why did you come here? I wanted to buy burgers. For burgers, you probably need to exit from there and go there, and there's a stall out there. So you'll find support. I think the first thing which is very important as a foreign entrepreneur is to reach out. If you don't reach out, people would not know you have a problem or what are you up to. Okay, first thing. Second thing that's I think which works in the Swedish model is that there is a lot of foreign students who come over here, and Sweden makes it very easy for foreign students to continue their journey forward in Sweden as long as they can either find a job or start their venture. Many students don't know that, and I think that's a gap which needs to be filled, that when foreign students come over here, they get within study period coaching on how they can launch a venture or become part of a venture. I think that is one space which is missing.
Is it
Because
easy for foreign students to get jobs in Sweden?
I have a lot of successful cases. I don't see any problem over there. So I think the job industry, like for example, especially if you are a tech person, Sweden is shorthanded by so hundreds of thousands of jobs right now. So it depends on which field you are. Maybe if you are doing your specializations in sales and marketing, it might be difficult because Sweden still has Swedish as the main language. If that is the main language and you as a foreigner don't know it at a native level, it'll be difficult for you to do a customer sales or a sales or a marketing copywriting level job. It won't work. So I think it is linked to number one, are you coached enough at the university level of the opportunities out there? I think not enough. I think foreign entrepreneurs, when they come, they need to see if their field is the main field they would like to go in with the entrepreneurship. So maybe you end up studying sales and marketing, but you could found a company in, let's say, how would you say, an HR tech company. Who stops you from doing that? So you can use all that marketing knowledge in creating a venture as opposed to doing a marketing job, I would say. So I think that level of coaching is very important, because finding a marketing level job with low Swedish language understanding would be a no-winner. Then you won't get the job and you'll have to leave. So I think it's a little bit of smart planning from the student side, but also some planning from the university side. That's the second case. Third thing that I've seen is that many migrant entrepreneurs come to European markets on asylum or refugee status. I think that's where I think I find Swedish system to be quite generous in terms of opportunity provision. So there's a lot of support programs available where you can learn Swedish and then go very quickly into the work market. So I think system is very enabling. I think the only problem that I see is that for some people it might not be as easy to learn language at a fluent level, and if they want to take a job or if they are interested in taking a job which is language intensive, that could delay their goals or create problems for them. But I think system is quite generous and quite open. There's a lot of support around you. I would say what's important also is, as an entrepreneur, again, it's again up to you, is to very quickly create your network. If you land into a new place, you need to do your networking, like find, would you be creating a venture based on your network based in Pakistan, or you would say that's a different network, I'll create a network based here, what kind of people I need to meet. There's a lot of prioritization you need to do. Without, and it's like anything, even if you're in your own country, you will need to do those things, because if you don't do work in your country, you still can't get a job. So I think a challenge is a challenge, but the marketplace only makes it that your context changes, but it doesn't mean that you don't have to work on a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'd like to, because we're coming up on the end of the hour here, but I want to get back and learn a little bit more about you and what you're involved with, because everything's just so interconnected. You're basically fused with your ecosystem anyway. So
Yeah.
you your personal portfolio company, those that you have interest in, and do you have I know you mentioned on your LinkedIn that you have an early exit, and that's like a human capital focused enterprise. What other companies are you working with that you're excited about? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
I think that's a very interesting question. I think, and I was having a discussion with a VC a couple of weeks ago, and we got stuck somewhere like, how would you define your portfolio? And we kind of brainstormed together. He was a friend, and we eventually said that, and we started talking about Nokia at that time. So somehow we had interest in Nokia, and that person also had interest in Nokia, and we said that Nokia had a great positioning line called connecting people. So my venture are also a lot impact people-based social or business model innovations. So these are ventures in HR space. These are ventures in music tech. There's a venture in branding and ad tech. How would you say? Maybe you can also call it a media tech venture. There's a very interesting venture we are working in event management space and streaming space, which could completely change the structure of hybrid and digital events. Because the problem that I see in the events market is that when COVID came, the entire industry said, oh no, what do we do? We have been doing events this way. How should we do? And then when that happens, usually the entire board and management team kind of sits together and they start, okay, we need to think like this. Your time span is very short. You are strapped on resources and you want to go out to the market with some redefinition. But what you forget over there is, shit, we didn't ask the consumer, because the reality also changed for them. So I think what we are doing in that venture is that we are creating an event management system completely from the consumer side, which the entire market has ignored. So the entire market has gone big tech, hybrid events, more tech, even more tech on top of tech. So I think that's not the place to go, and we'll soon know it. So it's a very hush hush idea, but it's an interesting idea. We'll come out with that. So it's a complete social level innovation from consumer sides on the events industry. Yeah.
Cool. I have a few startups that I'm familiar with that I'm going to share with you, separately that you might be interested in, just in learning about what they're doing. Yorgo, as we have a few minutes left here, before I ask our traditional last questions, do you have any final thoughts or questions of Naimul?
Yeah, sure. What are the big takeaways over the last 12 months?
And you're saying generally for the startup industry or the ecosystem?
Primarily for the startup industry. What were the most frequent challenges you had from your ecosystem? That's the first thing. The second was, did you see a significant change in valuations in assessing companies over this period of time?
Okay, very good. I'll go back and see. So I think any change can be seen as a catastrophe or as a point of opportunity. So I think the initial reaction to the market, because when something very big hits you, you kind of become numb for a while. So I think market was numb for a first 1 or 2 months, and it happened globally. Nobody knew what kind of support packages were coming. So people were just like, oh. And then you said, okay, now we need to do something. And that's where I think I found our the Swedish ecosystem to be very resilient. The market, as we said when we were discussing entrepreneurship journeys, is very digital savvy. So everything evolved very quickly onto the digital side. So I think positive outcome for this was people evolved very quickly to the digital side. Number two, re-questioning. So Sweden is also a market which is going a lot right now. There's a major trend happening. This is that people are going back to their whys. So if you go to any Swedish entrepreneurship meetup, people will be talking about whys, ikigai, your soul. What's the bigger purpose of doing anything that you're doing or everything that you're doing? So I think the soul searching was the second outcome that happened. And that soul searching has left people in terms of moving to entrepreneurship, in moving to creating solutions. Third thing is that collaborations have increased, because people, when they think, when you think that you have a combined enemy out there, you unite. So I think that unity is showing up. So there is unity, there is entrepreneurship activity going on from soul searching, and there is digitalization. All three are positive outcomes which have come, and which is leading to a lot of venture creation. Of course, on the other side, you don't have a lot of new investment opportunities creation, but then the government stepped in, and then they created a lot of venture support things, that if you are running a business which has had a loss during this time, you can support, you can get support from the organization. That's one type of support. If you need to lay off people, don't, bring it down, let them continue at a lower level. Second level of support. Third level of support is that new venture funds have come in, and they have started working with impact innovation. So I think with impact, there's a lot of new venture activity and support money coming in. And that's huge level. Coompanion, for example, and other players have been given challenges by the governments to create specific missions in terms of reducing short-term challenges and bottlenecks in startup ecosystems. That's the fourth level change. So there's a lot of money now coming from EU and from government to be released in removing temporary bottlenecks which can get the ecosystem going fast. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. Of course, there is some lag whenever things happen. There is lag because there is some decision making leads to some policy leads to action flows into things underneath, which are support networks. But eventually we'll survive and come out stronger the other side, I would say.
And what about valuations? Have you seen any significant change in valuations of startups?
I think my domain is early stage startups, very early stage startups. So nothing major. In fact, we have seen large shifts in where, so Klarna, Epidemic Sound, there are 3 or 4 major cases which have happened in the last couple of months. So it's a huge swing on the big side, and on the seed capital or the pre-seed side, I think there is no change over there. All I can see is that things are looking even more positive on that side.
So we're up against the time here, and we have one standard question we ask all of our guests, and this is what can the global collection of Startup Grind chapter directors in our community that listen in, what can we do for you personally? What can we do for Stockholm? What can we do for what can we do for you?
I think that's a great point. What I think is very important is, for example, an event like you are doing, or talks like you are doing, where chapter directors can show faces at each other's chapters, because that's a great way for chapters to learn from each other. So we could, for example, and that's, we don't do it much. So it would be great to probably invite somebody from a place which is very different and a very fast growing ecosystem like India, and find of getting that chapter director featured on our thing. Like, guys, let's look at best practices from India. I think that's one thing. Second thing, which I think community has already started doing that at an HQ level, is thematic months. And that information, if that can come faster out, because right now we book events 3-4 months in advance, and if the information just comes 4 days ahead or 2 weeks ahead, but we are trying to adapt. I think it's a great initiative. What I like about it is it's a great initiative. I think it could be improved by having this a couple of months in advance, so that all this can be aligned together. So I think those are the 2 things where I think Stockholm could benefit. If we can have some local visibility of global chapter directors coming in and sharing their ecosystem stories. And second is, if we can have these thematic things, so that the entire Startup Grind community looks the same going forward. At times that can become boring as well, but I don't know. You can always experiment and see how it goes.
And then for the folks that might want to be reaching out to you personally and individually, what's the best way to communicate with you, and who specifically do you want to hear from?
I'm available on LinkedIn. If you have an idea, you can come contact me on LinkedIn. And the best way forward for me to support your startup would be that we'll book a meeting for you through the organization that I work for, Coompanion, because that's a place where we advise entrepreneurs. So LinkedIn and then a meeting through Coompanion is the best way to go forward.
Cool. Yorgo, final thank you.
Well, I don't know if it's only going to be a thank you, because Naimul put so much light in a whole range of issues that we haven't heard from other directors. At times when you're talking about asking questions and so on and so forth, you remind me of Henry in Vancouver, because his social work is very similar and he has the same approach to things. So that was wonderful to hear. Also, your analysis of your ecosystem is probably one of the most groundbreaking that we've heard over the last year, because, and Naimul, we do not have that many ecosystems that are so sophisticated. The third aspect, I think, which was very positive in terms of your presentation, was the highlighting of the opportunity in Sweden, both because of the social model and the social background that the country as a whole has, but also the response to COVID. I think here in the US, the press has been, on the one hand, glorifying Sweden, on the other hand, lionizing it. So we had polarized views, and thank you for your contribution in this regard. Please remember that Corey and I are here. We're in the middle of the Great Lakes. If there is anything we can do for you, let us know. And always feel free to ask us for questions or ways that we can contribute to your work. Thank you very much for today's participation.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me here. I really enjoyed the talk. The questioning was incisive. It was on the spot. So I really enjoyed. When you are playing table tennis or tennis, you need to be working at the same pace. So I love the way the volleys were coming. Oh, good. Yes. Now this one I can leave. No, I can just do a little bit like this and it'll still reach there. And
Naimul, I haven't even asked you about the collaboration between Volvo and Great Wall and what's happening there, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of change happening in Sweden in the big corps. And for example, IKEA is from Sweden, but it's global. So I think that's very much the case with any organization. So, because organizations are another way of organizing and countries are another way of organizing. So let's say Apple, for example, is Apple really a US brand, or is it an Indian brand, or is it so the brand is in the people. So
it's like the Vatican, it's a nation state.
Yes, that's one thing. So I believe it's very important to see organizations or corporations in their own right, as opposed to there is some country of origin involved, but corporations are pretty much independent entities, and so are entrepreneurs. It's a global free market. And if you are a person who can thrive in Nigeria versus New York versus Delhi, it's your choice. You should do it, and the world should enable you to do it. I think that's very important. I would also like to thank over here Scott. Scott, thank you so much for being here. I've been seeing your reactions and your questions over here. Brilliant. Thank you for bringing these up. Thank you so much.
Very cool, Naimul. I look forward to connecting with you again. We'll reach out in a few months to sort of see how things have panned out.
By all means.
And really grateful to have your contribution to the Startup Grind family. You've already made such an incredible impact on our incoming cohort and those that are existing. And I know that Yorgo and I are going to really take advantage of your teachings as we develop our Michigan and Great Lakes ecosystem here. So thank you very much for the generosity.
Thank you so much, and have a really, really good weekend.
All right.
Bye-bye. Take care. Take care.